the picture whenever I get there. I would just like to tell you all that it's a picture of my brother, and he doesn't know I'm doing this. So today, in case you haven't gotten the message, today is the second Sunday of Advent. We are getting closer and closer and closer and closer to the holiest and most exciting day of the church year. We are getting closer and closer and closer when the world will know the advent of peace, when we will have a glimpse or a foretaste of the peace that is meant to be for all of us, for our whole entire world. As we journey toward Bethlehem, we dream and we hope for a world where peace is the order of the day. But sometimes we get stuck. Do you ever feel like you're stuck? Stuck in the same old rut? Stuck in standing in those same old lines? Stuck listening to the same old music? Stuck in the same old way of life? If I could have that picture now, please. This is the big guy there at the front with all the hair. That's my brother Steve. And he's who this story is going to be about. He's like the perfect sermon illustration. The others in the group, my niece Holly, her friend Chad, my sister-in-law Karen, and my nephew Matthew. But this is about Steve. Now, Steve doesn't know I'm telling this story, but this is a story that has been told for, well, Steve's 72. So this story's been told for about the last 60 years every time there's a family get together, and the story gets better and better and better every time I hear the story. Oh, it's a good story. When my brother was about 10 years old, he got stuck. You know how we get stuck in lines and we get stuck all kinds of places? Well, my brother at 10 years old, he got stuck. It was a bitter, cold winter in southwestern Kentucky where we all grew up. Now, as bitter cold as a winter gets in southwestern Kentucky, that is. My brother was coming from the barn, because we all lived on a farm. He was coming from the barn to the house. And keep in mind, he was 10 years old, and the way he tells the story, that he was trudging through snow that was about waist deep, and it was a full moon, and the moon was glistening all over the snow, and there were all these ice crystals and all this stuff going on to this 10-year-old's wonderful little mind. My brother ended up being an engineer in his adult life, so keep that in mind. So, and there it was, sitting in the backyard, this old steel swing set, and the moonlight was just glistening off that old steel swing set, and the moonlight was glistening off the snow, and he said it was probably the prettiest thing he'd ever seen in his whole life. And he says, I'm looking at that swing set, and he says, all of a sudden, it just felt like it would taste just like the grape popsicles that mom used to make us when we were all kids in the hot July summer. So he says he approached that swing set, and there was that crossbar, and it was just a glistening and a glittering and a carrying on. And then all of a sudden, he just couldn't help himself. He says it was like a hand of God just came down on him and pushed him right up to that swing set. And he stuck his tongue on the crossbar. He says, and my brother was glued. He was stuck. He was stuck proper to that bar. And he says there was absolutely no one around to help. And he was absolutely immobilized, unable to move. He couldn't utter more than a sound than just a little bit of a groan, and he did that. And he says, to my young, agonized, terrified mind, there seemed to be two possibilities. One was to preserve his tongue intact and suffer hypothermia. My brother's a storyteller. To suffer hypothermia, and hopefully before death comes along, or he could escape to the warmth of the house where everybody was all gathered, doing whatever we were doing. So he chose to rip his tongue off that bar. Oh, doesn't that hurt? Oh, gosh. Oh, well, so he chose to forgo a little bit of flesh. He got into the house. I remember because I'm 2 years younger than Steve. I remember there being lots of yelling, mom saying, "Get your father. What happened? What were you doing? What's all this blood? Get a wet towel." She's screaming all these orders out to no one in particular because she's doing everything herself, right? Unfortunately, there was no permanent damage to my brother. He talks a good talk now. I remember there being lots of yelling, lots of tears, and lots of, we're all glad that my brother is okay. Because we are human, you can take my brother now down now. If he ever comes to church here, don't ever tell him. Because we are all human, we are bound to have the experience of being frozen stuck. Now, wasn't that a good illustration for frozen stuck? Unable to budge, simply stuck in the trauma of the events that surround us. And when we find ourselves crying out in such straits, fortune may be with us as a nearby rescuer approaches, or our cries may fade into the distance, eliciting absolutely no response at all. Then, desperate for deliverance, our pleading eyes turn heavenward for the peace that we long for. I have made the acquaintance of frozen, stuck people as they lay in hospital beds or stand at the bedside of a family member or a friend. For some, the confining course of illness is very like the experience of a tender tongue being frozen stuck to a steel crossbar of an old backyard swing set. It is in such vulnerable moments that someone may come along with a compassionate presence and a strength of faith, and we hear the voice of one calling in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight." Indeed, it is the activation of one's own faith that is the freeing agent that loosens the heart and mind from the frozen immobility. That is what John the Baptist preached. He consistently points out to all who would listen that the Messiah is among them, that peace is here, and that same peace that John the Baptist preached all those years ago, that same peace is meant for us today. Apart from human events that constitutes a crisis, there's all kinds of ways for us to become frozen stuck. It doesn't have to be in a crisis. And we can become frozen stuck without even really realizing that it is even happening. There's the parent, good parent, who is their heart's desire is to be the very best parent that they can be, but it's at the cost of everything and everybody else in their lives. Someone gets left by the wayside. There's the workaholic being stuck in climbing the corporate ladder or making more money at the cost of everybody and everything else in their lives. There are all sorts of ways and places to become frozen stuck, and they're not all bad places. We tend to journey through life in ruts increasingly deeper and increasingly narrower. And then one day, much to our chagrin, we discover that we are standing alone in the wilderness, far from where we began, far from our goals and far from our heart's desires, maybe even far from God, frozen stuck without even realizing that it has happened. We cry out for what will free us to live in peace once again. And then we hear the voice of John the Baptist crying out in the wilderness, "Prepare the way for the Lord, make his path straight." Like John the Baptist, each of us is also called to be a welcoming voice, calling out to those who are isolated in dry desert places, or to those who are stuck on hard, cold steel, whether it be a swing set or whether it be in life. Like John, we are called to seek out those frozen, stuck people who cross our paths, freeing them with the compassion of our presence and the strength of our faith. Today, we hear the voice of John the Baptist calling out in the wilderness to make paths straight for the coming of the Messiah. The voice of John is coming to us centuries later for us to make our paths straight for the coming of the Prince of Peace by helping those who are stuck in the everydayness of life, or stuck in poverty, or in hospital, in prison, in isolation, in mental illness, in marginalization, or in trying to be perfect in our careers or our families or our communities. So this morning, grab a hand and let's continue our journey to Bethlehem as we listen to the prophet's voice to make our path straight so that we will not be frozen stuck as we await the coming of the Prince of Peace. Amen.